In just 9 minutes, $127 million in Ukraine aid funds would raise questions that shook Washington's defense establishment. Kash Patel didn't expect the offshore account records. Senator Richardson didn't reveal her forensic accounting team. Cameras captured every moment of institutional tension. The Budget Committee chamber erupted in controlled chaos. What did congressional investigators discover about aid? Distribution that made one of defense's most powerful figures face questions he couldn't immediately answer? Early winter morning. Senate Budget Committee hearing room. Dirksen Building. The atmosphere carried unusual weight as Ukraine assistance programs faced intensive oversight examination. Kash Patel entered like a senior official who had navigated countless appropriations reviews. Charcoal suit precisely tailored. Defense credentials. Establishing authority. Briefcase containing protocols that would prove insufficient against what Senator Margaret Richardson had compiled. Behind him followed Pentagon liaison officers and congressional affairs specialists. Their expressions projected confidence, masking uncertainty about why this emergency hearing had been convened with minimal notice. They had prepared for standard questions about aid distribution, equipment verification, ally coordination. None anticipated the financial documentation Richardson was about to deploy. Senator Margaret Richardson sat like a forensic investigator who had spent months tracing financial flows through international banking systems. Her reading glasses reflected overhead lighting as she organized a thick binder marked Confidential Financial Crimes Unit. The Wisconsin Democrat had built her reputation on budget, accountability, and systematic analysis. Today, she would deliver the most consequential appropriations confrontation in recent memory, using banking records and methodical inquiry. The committee chamber buzzed with anticipation. Defense reporters filled observer seats, equipment trained on the two figures about to engage in confrontation that would dominate discourse for months. Financial networks carried the hearing live to audiences, sensing something unprecedented. Hashtags had been trending since morning as analysts shared speculation about explosive documentation. Chairman Peters called the session to order with notable gravity. This committee convenes for emergency oversight regarding Ukraine's security assistance, appropriations, and distribution verification. We will examine interagency coordination and financial accountability mechanisms. Patel opened with prepared remarks, voice projecting confidence. Senator Richardson, Chairman Peters, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss assistance coordination. We maintain rigorous accountability standards, ensuring taxpayer resources reach intended operational purposes. Richardson allowed him to complete his statement, hands resting on the financial binder. When Patel concluded, Richardson leaned forward with intensity. Mr. Patel, Richardson began with precise formality. You mentioned rigorous accountability. Let's examine those claims through documented financial flows rather than procedural assurances. She opened the binder deliberately, revealing documents that made Patel's expression shift. Are you familiar with Defense Security Cooperation Agency transaction record involving $127 million in supplemental assistance funds? Patel's posture stiffened. Specific transaction records were dangerous territory. Senator, I coordinate oversight across numerous programs. Specific transaction details involve complex interagency processes. This transaction was provided to congressional oversight through mandatory reporting. Richardson interrupted with surgical precision. Would you like to know what our financial analysis revealed about where these funds actually flowed? The indication that investigators had traced the funds sent ripples through the chamber. Patel's team exchanged concerned glances. Let me walk you through the transaction chain, Richardson continued. $127 million was transferred to what Pentagon records describe as Regional Partnership Coordination Services. The entity was called Atlantic Defense Solutions, a company registered in Delaware barely 2 weeks before receiving this massive transfer. She looked up. Were you aware Atlantic Defense Solutions was incorporated 16 days before receiving $127 million? The timeline triggered audible reactions. Reporters began typing rapidly. Hastily created entities receiving massive transfers. Senator, coordination services require establishing corporate structures that interface with allied frameworks, Patel responded, confidence wavering. Timeline considerations don't necessarily. Let me tell you what else our investigation revealed. Richardson interrupted. Atlantic Defense Solutions lists its address as a virtual office. No physical operations. No employees beyond 2 officers. No prior defense history. She paused. Does it concern you that $127 million went to what appears to be a shell entity? The phrase shell entity detonated in the chamber. Within 72 hours of receiving the Pentagon transfer, Atlantic Defense Solutions initiated wire transfers to 4 offshore accounts. Total transferred $119 million. Gasps throughout the chamber. Aid funds moved rapidly offshore. 4 offshore accounts. Mr. Patel, Cayman Islands, Cyprus, UAE, Singapore. Would you like to know who controls these accounts? Patel sat motionless, realizing Richardson had traced the entire network. These accounts are controlled by Strategic Partnership Holdings, Global Defense Advisors, Allied Coordination Services, and Regional Security Partners. Richardson read. All incorporated within 3 weeks, all using the same registration service, all listing the same agent. The pattern painted deliberate financial force architecture. Mr. Patel, these entities appeared simultaneously, received massive transfers, and moved funds immediately offshore. Does this appear like legitimate coordination or financial engineering? Minutes into Richardson's examination, Patel experienced visible institutional discomfort. His frameworks about coordination complexity were collapsing. Senator, without classified operational details. This isn't classified, Richardson interrupted sharply. Banking records, corporate filings, wire transfers, all obtained through legitimate oversight. Nothing classified about Delaware incorporation records and Cayman accounts. She produced another document. This is internal Pentagon email from your office. Quote, USAI supplemental requires expedited distribution framework. Establish coordination entity Atlantic Defense Solutions. Approval timeline critical. Standard vetting protocols should be streamlined, given operational urgency. End quote. The email directly connected him to the entity that received and redirected funds. Streamlined vetting protocols, Richardson repeated with controlled outrage. Did you personally direct creation of an entity that received $127 million without standard verification? Patel's hands gripped the table edge. Senator, operational urgency requires flexibility, or circumvention, Richardson shot back. Here's what else we discovered. Financial disclosure forms filed by individuals connected to the offshore entities. These forms show that relatives of senior officials have financial interests in entities that received redirected funds, not direct ownership, but beneficial interests, consulting arrangements, partnership stakes. The implication was explosive, aid funds flowing to networks connected to officials' families. Mr. Patel, your office expedited entity creation. That entity moved funds offshore. Those accounts connect to entities where officials' relatives have interests. Are you seeing why this committee has concerns? The chamber had transformed from routine oversight to documented financial investigation. Senator, Patel attempted defensively. You're constructing a narrative that ignores legitimate operational requirements. Am I? Richardson's voice cut through. Let me play you something. Audio from a meeting in your office. 47 seconds. The committee filled with clear audio. Patel's voice, unmistakable. The supplemental creates opportunities. We need frameworks that move quickly without congressional visibility. Atlantic structure keeps this clean. Entity formation, transfer execution, offshore dispersion, all within administrative discretion. Silence was absolute. Without congressional visibility, keeps this clean. Mr. Patel, those are your words describing financial architecture designed to avoid oversight. How do you explain this? Patel sat frozen, realizing the full extent of what Richardson had obtained. Audio recordings were the nuclear option. Senator, that conversation lacks context. Let me provide. Context, Richardson interrupted with controlled fury. We have corporate records showing rapid entity creation, banking records showing offshore transfers, financial disclosures showing personal connections, and now audio of you describing this as keeping things clean and avoiding congressional visibility. She leaned forward. What we're documenting isn't operational. Complexity. its potential systematic diversion through deliberately obscure channels to entities with personal connections. The summary was devastating. Not floating allegations, but documented patterns connecting incorporation, authorization, transfer, offshore movement, and personal interest. This committee has traced $127 million through a financial maze that appears designed to obscure rather than facilitate, Richardson stated with authority. We have your office expediting entity creation, your voice describing avoiding oversight, offshore accounts receiving funds within days, personal connections to receiving entities. She gathered documents methodically. What we don't have is explanation from you about why assistance funds followed this pattern. Why the urgency? Why offshore accounts? Why personal connections? Why avoiding congressional visibility? The questions hung unanswerable. Patel had no safe response. Richardson delivered the defining moment. Mr. Patel, this committee is referring this matter to the Department of Justice Inspector General for investigation of potential misuse of appropriated funds. We are also requesting Government Accountability Office conduct comprehensive audit of all assistance distributions coordinated through your office. Formal referrals meant escalation to investigative processes with subpoena power. Additionally, this committee is placing a hold on all future supplemental appropriations until we receive complete accounting of every dollar distributed through coordination entities. The appropriations hold was nuclear cutting off future funding until accountability questions resolved. The chamber erupted as implications cascaded. Reporters filed breaking alerts. Networks interrupted programming. Hashtags trended globally as audio recording and offshore revelations went viral. Patel gathered materials with trembling hands, full scope of jeopardy clear. He had entered, expecting routine discussion. He left with Inspector General investigation announced, appropriations frozen, and audio evidence creating permanent concerns. That evening, former officials spoke with unusual directness. When you have audio describing financial architecture as avoiding congressional visibility, that's not efficiency. That's consciousness of circumventing oversight. The White House issued brief statement defending coordination without addressing specific patterns. Congressional leadership announced expanded investigation. Media focused relentlessly on audio recording and the gap between stated purposes and documented offshore transfers. The Ukraine aid files had become a case study in how financial documentation can raise profound accountability questions. Without requiring immediate legal conclusions, Patel faced no charges, no arrests, no judicial process, but he faced formal investigation, appropriations freeze, and audio evidence that would be analyzed in every future oversight context. Sometimes the most powerful oversight weapon isn't a subpoena or criminal referral. It's a senator with banking records, forensic accounting, and recordings that create permanent questions about intent. The Ukraine aid files raised questions that would follow every future appropriation, every coordination claim, every assertion of accountability. What happens when assistance funds follow patterns designed to avoid oversight? Can administrative authorities survive when personal connections intersect with offshore accounts? Richardson proved that in Washington, the most damaging exposure isn't always what can be prosecuted. It's what can be documented in corporate filings, banking records, and recorded conversations. The 9 minutes when Richardson played audio changed the oversight calculus. The examination created permanent record of questions demanding answers. If this story revealed tension between assistance, urgency, and accountability mechanisms, next investigation might involve programs you assumed had oversight. This story is a work of fiction set in an alternate narrative universe. It does not depict real events, crimes, or factual allegations. The character presented is a fictionalized construct used for dramatic storytelling purposes only.